And we welcome you back to this special edition of the Steve Malzberg Show. Steve Malzberg standing by and what we're calling the Igloo, a special location, his bunker, as he is calling it. Steve will be back full speed ahead tomorrow. But today marks the 70th anniversary of the liberation of the concentration camp Auschwitz. Just 10 years ago, 1,500 survivors made the journey to Auschwitz to remind those of the horrible acts that were conducted there, to remind the world and make sure we never forget. Today, there are only 300 survivors expected to attend, and joining us right now to talk about this and why we all need to remember this day and several others of import is Kenneth Jacobson, Deputy National Director of the Anti-Defamation League. Kenneth, John Bachman in Florida, Steve Malzberg near New York City, and we're glad to have you with us.
Good to be on.
All right, Steve, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, John. Kenneth, thank you. Welcome. 1.1 million people, mostly overwhelmingly Jews, between 1940 and 1945, when the Soviets liberated Auschwitz. Talk about the significance of today's events and anniversary.
Well, first, it's a question of memory, respect for those who perished under the horrible Nazi regime. We can't forget. Secondly, there are so many lessons to be learned, especially, as we speak, it's a time of a massive resurgence of anti-Semitism in the very continent where all this took place. And so we have to learn from it, and there's a lot to be learned. There's a sense of what ideology of hatred can do, whether it was the Nazi ideology or today ideologies around the world of terrorism, radical Islamic extremism, and we have to take all that seriously. The one positive note today is that the governments in Europe are not the perpetrators of anti-Semitism. Mostly they stand up against it. They're not doing enough against it, but people like Angela Merkel and FrancoisHollande and David Cameron are, of course, fighting anti-Semitism and they're not perpetrating it. So we have a lot to learn. There's the need to remember the Holocaust really is to not only pay tribute to those who died, but to learn the lessons from it.
Well,
Kenneth, of course, as you I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, Kenneth, I wanted to ask you, because we were just talking about this. We had a caller who was asking about Francois Hollande and the fact that Mahmoud Abbas was there at the Paris Unity rally. You mentioned that they might not be doing enough to fight anti-Semitism. Was this one of those things that maybe Francois Hollande should have considered and not invited Mahmoud Abbas to that Unity rally?
That got very political. The question of originally, from what I understand, they didn't want to invite either Netanyahu or Abbas because they didn't want to complicate it with Middle East issues and, all of that. Look, the truth is they are strong enough on dealing with anti-Semitism. Part of the problem, though, is that some of the policies that are distorted towards the state of Israel play into the anti-Semites. People take advantage of it, and they basically say, well, if you're a Zionist or pro-Zionist, then it's justified attacking you as a Jew. So I wouldn't say, look, the politics in the Middle East are always intertwined with things, but the truth is anti-Semites don't need the Middle East to be anti-Semitic. Hatred of Jews by some, whether in Europe or in the Middle East, is based on an old-fashioned hatred and an ideology, and the Middle East often just becomes the excuse.
Yeah.
But let me ask you, see, what's very interesting, Kenneth, you brought up two great things, and I want to speak about Israel, because back then, of course, at the time of Auschwitz, the modern-day state of Israel did not exist. In the aftermath of World War II, we have the state of Israel. But we're at a point now where we have Iran openly threatening annihilation of Israel, while the United States and its president, mostly its president, works with Iran, says Iran is cooperating, says we can trust Iran. In fact, relayed a message to Israel through Iran, according to the AP, that Israel, in reportedly killing an Iranian general in the Golan Heights, crossed the line and they'll suffer the consequences. So how detrimental is it to the overall safety of Jews around the world when the appearance is that the United States is not as big a supporter of Israel as it used to be?
Well, you introduced a variety of subjects there, which would take me a while. But let me just first, on Iran, I think we have to separate two issues, the nuclear issue and the broader attitudes towards Iran. On the latter, I do find it troubling that we sometimes see, quote-unquote, Iran as an ally, for example, in the fight against ISIS, and we sometimes temper our comments. Iran is the most dangerous country in the region, not only to Israel, but to the Arabs of the Gulf, and we should make it clear what we think of Iran. On the other hand, the nuclear issue is one that has to be resolved. We would like to see the United States stick to what it says, which is better no deal with Iran than a bad deal. It's not always so clear whether that's where we're going, and some of us have questions about it. But on the other hand, I think Israel and the United States both would want to find a deal that would prevent Iran from reaching out to develop a nuclear weapon.
Certainly. Kenneth Jacobson from the Anti-Defamation League, thank you very much. We got to step aside. Ford O'Connell, Steve Malzberg, John Bachman. We'll be right back with you after this.